This is the GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2-3 pages on Masculist and MGTOW ideas, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 394, entitled "Holding the Masculist Knife to the Throats of the Gender Politicians." Description. This flyer predicts there will be a sex war unless the gender politicians soon menfair the gender laws. In today's Western world, one father in 4 gets financially crucified and has his life destroyed in the hated, fluffy, feminist-dominated divorce court system. The gender politicians who created these hated gender laws in the first place will be the first targets of the masculist soldier army. Masculist theorists are teaching young women that the primary reason why young quality men refuse to give them their sperm is due to the toxicity of the divorce courts, so that young childless women should join forces with the masculists to express their hatred of and to assassinate the gender politicians and fluffy feminists as readily as men when the sex war bursts into reality. Flyer itself. Holding the Masculist Knife to the Throats of the Gender Politicians, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. The above title sounds ominous, threatening, the beating of war drums, and it is. It's the label of this masculist fire that predicts that if the gender laws are not soon men-faired, for example, in the divorce courts, the para, that's paternity rejection right, legislated, etc., then a sex war will take place, with the gender politicians being the primary target for assassination. This flyer is a dire warning to the gender politicians that if they don't soon act on the demands of the masculists and MGTOWs, then they will risk assassination at the hands of masculist soldiers, of bitterly hateful childless young women, and of responsible citizens of all types. Wars can take decades to brew. The First World War took decades to brew as Germany increased the size of its fleet to rival that of the UK, which profoundly threatened the UK, since Britain's economy and particularly its food supply depended on imports from its colonies. So if the German Navy could block food transport to the UK, the Brits could starve. Churchill said regularly that World War I and World War II were about the destruction of Germany so that its threat to Britain could be removed. The slavery issue in the US brewed away for decades. When the US Constitution was written late in the 18th century, the slavery issue was brushed under the carpet, only to rear its ugly head with a vengeance in the middle of the following century, which led to the US Civil War. Similarly, the sex war that the masculists are talking about increasingly will also probably take decades to brew, but it is brewing, with tensions and hatreds increasing, that if not cooled by the gender politicians acting in a timely manner, then things will explode. Men will take up arms and go to war to stop being financially massacred by the fluffy feminist divorce courts, and a misandrous, monoconscious culture that does not understand why the masculists are so full of hatred, and why masculists talk of a sex war to liberate men from man-slavery, from decades-long oppression at the hands of fluffy parasites and fluffy feminist hypocrisy that is destroying men in their millions in the hated, fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts. Why are the masculists talking increasingly of a sex war? What is the reasoning behind this talk, this ever louder beating of the war drums? Here it is in a few paragraphs, ad-libbing, preceded by bullets, that is, lists, bullets. Bullet. Men liberated women, that is, from household drudgery, by giving women the contraceptive pill, household gadgets, science-based medicine, a life expectancy well into the 80s. Bullet. Women, even if they have their 2 kids, thus have a career window of half a century. Bullet. The Masculists put real moral pressure on women to FIP up, that is, become FIPs, that's financially independent persons, by bothering to get a career competent education so that they can be FIPs as adults, not expecting to be fluffies, that is, traditional women who expect to be able to parasite off the money and labour of a man. Close brackets. By pulling their own financial weight and not manslaving a man, living off his labour for decades. Bullet. Masculists are telling women, quote, now that you can work, you must work. Anything else is manslavery. Bullet. To the Masculists, manslavery is slavery and hence a moral abomination. Masculists see manslavery in the 21st century as much a moral abomination as abolitionists saw Negro slavery in the northern states of the US in the 19th century. Just as the abolitionists saw Negro slavery as a war issue in the 19th century, the Masculists see manslavery as a war issue in the 21st century. Bullet. The fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts are seen as hateable hypocrites by the Masculists because these women behave as feminists in the parliaments, pushing for equal rights and opportunities for women. But since they are monoconscious, that is, they have only had their feminist consciousness raised, they have, by default, traditional fluffy expectations of men. That is, quote,
seeing men as cash machines, to pay for women to have babies,
end quote, who then rob and abuse men in the divorce courts, financially crucifying them and destroying their lives at a rate of about 1 father in 4. Bullet. Masculists see the fluffy feminists as hypocrites who want equal rights for women but reject equal obligations for women. That is, the fluffy feminists want their cake and to eat it too. They want equal rights with men, but reject equal obligations with men by expecting divorcing women to behave as fluffy parasites in the divorce courts and destroying the lives of half of divorcing fathers as a result. Bullet. A divorcing father will typically lose custody of his kids with a probability of about 90%. He will lose his house to his fluffy ex-wife so that she can raise her kids in it. Bullet. He will lose half his stuff to her, half his wealth. Bullet. He will pay her child support to kids he will barely see, maybe 2 weekends a month. Bullet. If his wife is a real fluffy, he may have to pay her alimony for the rest of her life, with no moral nor legal obligation on her to get off her fat parasitic bum and fip up, so that she continues to parasite off his money after the divorce the way she did before the divorce. Bullet. Masculists see the massive gender injustice committed in the divorce courts as a casus bellum, that is, a cause for war, a sex war. Bullet. Masculists have a hatred of fluffies for the latter's tooth and nail opposition to the legislation of the para, that's paternity rejection right. It's becoming increasingly clear to the Masculists that women's real attitudes towards men are, that is, as, quote,
cash machines to pay for women to have babies.
Bullet. The legislation of the para is as important to the Masculists as was getting the right to vote for women to the suffragettes. Bullet. The fact that women have the MARA, maternity rejection right, but men don't have the para, is the most blatant form of sexual discrimination that exists, and it's not against women but against men. Women have the legislative right to terminate an unwanted pregnancy, but men don't. So millions of women are able to lie to their boyfriends/husbands that they are taking the pill, but aren't in reality, get pregnant, then force him to pay for a kid he doesn't want, thus manslaving him for decades. A major form of oppression of men by women, which makes such women hated by the masculists as targets in a future sex war. Bullet. Masculists have a real hatred of fluffies, seeing them as immoral, parasitic, manslaving vermin to be wiped out, to be punished severely by removing their fluffy parasite genes from the gene pool, by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, so that they are forced to rot on the shelf, unable to reproduce, since no man will go near them. Bullet. Masculists have an even greater hatred of the fluffy feminists, seeing them as hypocrites. It's bad enough that they are fluffies and hence man-slaving parasites, but they are also hypocrites, wanting equal rights for women, but rejecting equal obligations for women, that is, accepting to take up half the burden of earning the living by bothering to get a career-competent education, so as to become a responsible FIP as an adult, and not expecting to parasite off the labour and money of a gullible man-slave. Bullet. Masculists have the greatest hatred for the gender politicians, since it is they who created the deeply misandrous gender laws in the first place, that is, in the divorce courts, and who refuse to legislate the para. Bullet. As the sex war keeps brewing, as masculist hatred grows and grows, the gender politicians will be seen by the masculists, and increasingly by society in general, as masculist consciousness is taken up by the media, as the primary enemy of the masculists, and hence will become the primary targets for assassination when the sex war explodes into reality. Bullet. The gender politicians will be hated not only by the masculists, they will also be hated by young, childless women who have been told by masculist theorists that the main reason why quality young men, in brackets, whom these young women really want to mate with to obtain the quality DNA from these quality men for their kids, close bracket, refuse to give these young women their sperm is due to the toxicity of the divorce courts, taken over by the fluffy feminists and supported by the gender politicians who made the deeply misandrous gender laws that have ruined the lives of millions of men in Western countries. Bullet. Both masculists and young childless women, in brackets, plus concerned citizens of all types, close brackets, are now looking at the gender politicians and politicians in general as indirect genociders, since the gender politicians are failing to address those issues that are causing the birth rate to plummet due to the toxicity of the divorce courts for men. Bullet. In Western countries, plus Japan, Korea, etc., 2/3 of young men now refuse to marry, reject paternity due to the toxicity of the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts, and hence have become genociders, wiping out whole populations. This is the end of part 1.